Hi, good afternoon. I'm Pat O'Brien with the Milwaukee 7 Regional Partnership. I'm here today, as you're well aware, with our team from Southeast Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, and we're here to discuss and walk through uh, the uh, the draft process for us to become a comprehensive economic development strategic district of the federal EDA, Economic Development Administration. So, as you may know, this process started early last summer, went into high gear last fall. We've had several public meetings to help formulate the draft and get input. This is the final public meeting input with public comment period running through March 31st. And without further ado, I'll introduce Eric Lind, who will explain the ways you can engage up until March 31st and walk us through the process as it stands today. Eric?
All right, thank you, Pat. I'm going to share some slides with everybody. Can everybody see those? Maybe staff can let me know if they can see the slides, all right?
Yep.
Awesome. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for all for taking the time to join us. My name is Eric Lind. I'm the Chief Special Projects Planner with the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission staff. We do have a few other commission staff joining us today that will be helping to address your questions and comments during the meeting. Just a few housekeeping items. Want to talk about virtual meeting logistics real quickly. So we're using GoToWebinar for our platform today. This is the meeting's being held in webinar format, so everyone is in listen-only mode. But you can send us questions or comments during the meeting using the questions pane. We'll also have specific points when we ask you to type comments or questions using that questions pane. So I'll let you know when those are. And just a note that any comments or questions you send us will be only seen by staff, not other participants. Lastly, the meeting is being recorded. We will share the recording via email after the meeting with all of you. All right, brief overview on what the meeting will entail. So the 2021-2025 Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, or SEDS, is a joint effort between M7 and the Regional Planning Commission. The SEDS also involves input from M7's Regional Economic Partnership, or REP group, which is a working group of economic development professionals, including representatives from all 7 counties and the city of Milwaukee. For today's meeting, I will first give an overview of the SEDS and some background information. Then I will summarize the strategic framework and action plan, which are the primary focus of the meeting. As I go through the action plan's goals, strategies, and actions, we will provide opportunities for questions and comments, as I mentioned before, so we can consider your ideas before we finalize the SEDS. So what is the SEDS? The purpose of the SEDS is to bring together members of the public and the private sectors to develop a strategy-driven plan for regional economic development. We do have to prepare a new SEDS every 5 years for communities and organizations within the region to qualify for certain funding through the EDA. We have public works and economic adjustment assistance programs that the SEDS qualifies those communities and organizations for. Just to put that another way, if we don't have an adopted SEDS, we will be ineligible for EDA funding. To give you a sense of where we are in the process, we did start the SEDS in the summer of 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. In fall 2020, we held an initial stakeholder meeting and incorporated the feedback we received into the draft SEDS being presented to you all today. We will ask for feedback during today's meeting, and we'll also accept feedback through the end of March. So if you do want to send us any comments after the meeting, please visit the SEDS website, which is sewrpc.org/CEDS. You can get the contact info. I will also provide that contact info toward the end of the presentation. After this meeting, we'll be taking the feedback and finalizing the SEDS, and then looking for adoption from each of the 7 counties, as well as the commission later this spring, possibly early summer. So just a quick poll to engage you all before I dive in too deep that we would like you to respond to will pop up in a second. This is just to get a sense of how much background I should get into in the following background slides.
So Eric, the poll is not working. So you maybe want to get people to start and engage. Oh, there we go.
Is it working now?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So if you can see that poll, please do respond. We'll leave it up for just a minute and then we'll close it down and move on. All right, looks like most folks have voted here. Give it a few more seconds, Caleb, and then you can shut her down. All right. It looks like for most of you, this is your first stakeholder meeting. About 82% said that they did not attend the first one, which is just fine. I will make sure to keep that in mind as I move through the slides. So this was reviewed in more detail during the first stakeholder meeting last fall, but the summary background is one element that we considered when we prepared the SEDS action plan. And it is something that EDA requires to be included in the SEDS. The summary background covers various topics related to the regional economy, looking at past trends, current conditions, and what we project will happen in the future. It also includes identifying racial and geographical disparities and where the region is most vulnerable to disruption. I will review the summary background relatively quickly just to provide a foundation before I get into the meat of the SEDS, which is the action plan. But feel free to enter any questions on anything I review using the questions pane, as I mentioned before, and staff will try to answer those questions as they can. All right, I think everyone knows where we are. So this is just sort of a snapshot of the region to give you a basis. But we're talking about the 7-county southeastern Wisconsin region, which contains nearly 150 different local units of government, not including the 7 counties themselves. We have a little over 2 million residents and 1.3 million jobs in the region. One other thing we always like to point out is that we only make up about 5% of the state's land area, but about 35% of its population, jobs, and wealth. So we're kind of a big deal. In terms of population and housing, historically, population in the region has grown slowly but steadily, which is a trend that is projected to continue. We're a quote-unquote slow growth region. A major issue will be the aging of the population, as the age 65 plus age group is projected to grow significantly, and coupled with population growing slower than jobs. This means there will not be enough workers to fill additional new jobs, which is a significant challenge facing many businesses already. Housing affordability is another major obstacle faced by many communities within the region. A shortage of affordable housing near job centers outside the region's central cities makes it more difficult for businesses to attract or retain workers. In terms of education, there are some excellent educational institutes and growing achievement overall, but definitely some large gaps in achievement based on race and geography. This particularly impacts lower income students in cities like Milwaukee, Racine, and Kenosha, which presents a major workforce challenge. In addition, we need to better align education and workforce training with the needs of employers, which we will talk about later. All right. Speaking of the racial and ethnic disparities piece, the presence of continued poverty among people of color in our region is well known, particularly in the urban cores. The commission prepared a report last year that compared the Milwaukee metro area to peer metro areas in the Midwest and across the nation. That comparison showed, unsurprisingly, that disparities in terms of educational attainment, personal income levels, and poverty rates between whites and people of color in the Milwaukee metro area are far more pronounced than the disparities in almost all other metro areas in the country. Not a statistic we would like to be leading in. In Milwaukee County, the Hispanic population faces an unemployment rate double that of the white population, while the Black population faces an unemployment rate nearly triple that of the white population. This is a slide just to connect the disparities that we're facing with EDA funding eligibility. It's important to note that EDA focuses its funding on investments that create jobs and attract private dollars to what they call economically distressed areas. So for the purposes of its grant programs, EDA identifies economically distressed census tracts using unemployment rate and per capita income. To be considered economically distressed, an area must have an unemployment rate at least 1% over the US average and or a per capita income level of 80% or less than the US average. So the map on the slide here shows where those areas are located within the region, mostly in the Milwaukee, Racine, and Kenosha areas. A vast majority of the census tracts identified by EDA as being in economic distress, 81% of them have a minority population above the regional average. These distressed census tracts are where the impacts of the region's segregation and racial disparities are most prominent, with people of color facing a disproportionate struggle compared to white residents. And as I'll talk about later, the SEDS does identify ways to get at, quote unquote, undoing these disparities. In addition, some of you may be familiar with opportunity zones, which are a federal economic development tool intended to incentivize investment in designated low-income census tracts. So we've shown those on the map as well. It's probably hard for most of you to see that. This map is also in the full SEDS report if you're interested. All right, in terms of environment and recreation, the region does have some real assets in this arena, as the SEDS notes. The SEDS recognizes the need to protect natural resources, including our precious water and the areas delineated as environmental corridors, which do make up almost a quarter of the region's land area. We're also acknowledging the significant role that our tourism, cultural resources, and park amenities play in the economy and our quality of life. It's probably an understatement to say that the pandemic has put significant strain on all of these resources, and particularly from a tourism perspective, we obviously missed out on a lot of dollars that would have otherwise come into the economy in the past year. Related to infrastructure, transportation system, energy, broadband, those types of things. We do note in the SEDS that the street and highway system performs well compared to its peers, but it does face a major challenge in identifying adequate long-term funding. Our transit systems also perform very well given the amount of resources we provide them, but across the region they face a pretty daunting funding shortfall and some major challenges associated with just maintaining operations, as well as trying to connect residents to jobs in neighboring counties, and some pretty troubling ridership declines. The region does boast an extensive bike network that's been expanding and improving year after year, and that system does complement our park systems pretty nicely in providing attractive outdoor recreation activities. And we have a number of other assets as part of the multimodal transportation system: Milwaukee Mitchell International Airport, Port Milwaukee, Amtrak, the region's railroads all round out that system and support the movement of passengers and freight into and out of the region. We do note a broadband here, which is an obviously hot topic, especially given the highly virtual world we've been in over the past year. In general, high-speed broadband internet service is available to most of the region or in most of the region, but there are definitely some issues in providing it to everyone. In more rural areas, there's a need to expand the speeds and availability. And in our cities, our urban areas, there's a need to increase access and affordability. Moving on to the economy in general, like population, employment as a whole has been increasing at a slower rate than in most regions of comparable size in the US, which does present its own challenges. But in terms of unemployment, the pandemic initially more than tripled unemployment rates across the region. Those rates have been declining since their April 2020 peak, but do remain higher than they were the year before the pandemic in 2019. This is they're particularly much higher in Milwaukee County still, which is having a significant impact on people of color. And, we don't know the long-term economic impacts of the pandemic. Those remain to be seen, but we're certainly monitoring those very closely. In terms of industries, the regional economy has continued what has been a long-term shift from manufacturing jobs to service jobs. Although manufacturing is definitely a continued presence in the region and presents a competitive advantage, there's a significant source of jobs compared to peer regions in manufacturing. For innovation and entrepreneurship, there are high shares of the working age population employed as scientists, engineers, and in tech jobs. However, we're lagging behind our peers in measures of entrepreneurship, such as small business activity, minority business ownership, venture capital investment per capita, and the ratio of business births to deaths. So that covers relatively quickly the summary background information that we collected to inform the SEDS. Another required element of the SEDS that helped inform the action plan I'll be presenting was a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, or SWOT analysis. I know a few of you at least participated in last fall. The slide here just shows a few of the key SWOTs that were identified. The list is much longer, and there's a complete breakdown of each category that can be found in the full draft SEDS report. Just to highlight a few strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. As I mentioned, the region is still a leading manufacturing region in the US, and we do have a robust research and engineering presence with programs. We do have robust research and engineering programs, technological advantages, and a high concentration of employees in manufacturing. Another key strength are our clusters, which M7 has identified being in energy, power, and controls, water technology, food and beverage manufacturing, and there are a number of additional clusters. Key weaknesses, as I mentioned, racial disparities, which is probably the most prominent weakness. Policy differences that limit cooperation among the various communities in the region is another key weakness. Opportunities, we have an opportunity to enhance the capacity of small and medium-sized manufacturing or manufacturers to make sure that they can adapt to the ongoing rapid technological transformation that we're experiencing. And we also have an opportunity to improve the climate for entrepreneurs through continued growth of startup support organizations, programs, and resources. A couple of key threats, aging population and workforce, and as well a talent shortage, and then misaligned workforce with the skills that are needed to meet the needs of employers, which is especially critical in the manufacturing sector. All right, I'm going to just pause for a moment here before I jump into the action plan. I guess, let me just ask Caleb, are there any questions or comments that you think we should raise at this point based on the summary background or SWOT?
We did get a comment asking about the location of opportunity zones. I think maybe the map was a little small and maybe the text was difficult to read, but the opportunity zones, 80% of them are in Milwaukee County, and there are a lot of them located central, near north side, and northwest of Milwaukee County.
Yep, yes, that is correct. All right, thanks, Caleb. Now to get into the main part of why we're here today, talk about the strategic framework and action plan, which were informed by the summary background information, as well as the results of the SWOT analysis and input that we've gotten over the last few months from regional stakeholders like yourselves. This is the action plan here is also heavily influenced by Prosperity 2025, which for those who aren't aware is a 5-year campaign that was launched in 2020 by M7 and MMAC, which is the Metro Milwaukee Association of Commerce, which is seeking to raise $10 million to fund 3 focused strategies: growth, talent, and livability. The action plan includes the economic development vision. This is just a general vision for the SEDS, as well as 5 goals, each with a set of underlying strategies and actions to achieve the goals. There are way more actions that are in the SEDS than we have time for today, but I will touch on some of the key actions to give you a sense of how each goal and strategy would be implemented as I go through the next few slides. And just to provide you that vision for the SEDS, the vision is to be a globally competitive region that fosters innovation, collaboration, sustainable prosperity, and a high quality of life for all. As depicted in the graphic on the slide, hopefully it's a little bit bigger than the map we showed earlier, but the overarching first goal is to unify the region around a comprehensive approach to economic development based on Prosperity 2025's 3 key pillars of growth, talent, and livability, which then serve as the pillars in the graphic and also as goals 2, 3, and 4 in the action plan. And then all of that is supported through the provision of a modern, efficient regional infrastructure, which becomes goal 5. And the issues of economic resilience and equitable access to jobs and other opportunities are integral to the region's economy. Those are incorporated throughout the SEDS goals, as I'll point out on the following slides. Just a slide on resilience. This is an area of emphasis for EDA as part of the SEDS. Resilience is defined as the ability to prevent, withstand, and quickly recover from major disruptions to the economic base and adapt to changing internal or external economic conditions. So the SEDS touches on resilience in a number of different ways, creating a more diverse economy, helping businesses and workers adapt to technological shifts, promoting development that is sustainable and adds to the region's attractiveness, making sure our infrastructure is reliable, durable, and resilient to flooding and other natural disasters, and as well providing forums for stakeholders to communicate on a regular basis. And of course, the SEDS also recognizes that addressing the impacts of the pandemic is a top priority. In terms of equity, the SEDS recognizes that achieving equitable access to economic opportunity and to all the region's wonderful amenities has to be a top priority as well. As discussed previously, the region faces some of the worst racial and geographic disparities in the country, disparities that have only intensified due to the pandemic we've all been struggling through for the past year. And the SEDS puts it pretty plainly: for the region to succeed, the socioeconomic inequities faced by people of color must be addressed. All right, so the following slides, I'll go through each of the goals and each of the 5 goals, and then the strategies and actions under those goals. What we're going to try to do is we'll pause for a few minutes after each goal just to give time for folks to type in any comments. And then as time allows, and depending on how many comments we get, we'll read those out loud, and one of us will respond to the comments as they come in. So once again, you can use the questions pane to submit your questions or comments. You can do that at any time. We just ask that before you type your specific comment, that if you can start with the goal number. So for example, goal 1 or goal 2, that'll help us keep track of the comments as we go. All this feedback that we receive will be considered as we prepare the final SEDS. And as I mentioned, if you don't have time or if you want to think out your comments or questions after the meeting, we will be taking comments through the end of the month. All right, so as I mentioned, goal one is really the overarching goal. This is where regional agencies like M7, MMAC, SewerPAC come in to help. As the goal states, the goal is to unite the region around a comprehensive, equitable, and ongoing economic development agenda built on the pillars of growth, talent, and livability. So this involves reimagining our economic development agendas, stakeholders working together, and then making sure that we use sound planning and emphasize equitable access to economic opportunity. Strategy 1.1 is to enhance regional cooperation and collaboration. This strategy is about helping the region's economic development entities work together and with state and national economic development agencies, and as well as strengthening the civic engagement component of these processes, trying to create extensive, nimble networks that can adapt to change, and then performing services that support our region's businesses. Strategy 1.2 is to develop a process to analyze the economy and adapt to evolving conditions. This is where we will employ advanced future-looking analyses that are going to identify key trends and issues, and then help to prioritize strategic investments. This is something that I know M7 has been focusing on for the past year or so. This also involves designing a system of metrics that we can use and that our regional leaders can use to assess and maximize the results, and then recalibrate investment strategies as needed. And it involves working with stakeholders, especially communities, businesses from various sectors, and those traditionally that haven't been part of these processes. The third and final strategy under goal one is to support policy and processes that will improve the region's competitive standing. So this involves eliminating duplication, streamlining the provision of government services and permitting processes throughout the region. The strategy also seeks to enhance access to capital and access to public and corporate development incentives that are available to businesses. And it involves making sure businesses are prepared for disasters and that the economy is prepared for shocks like the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, so this is a first slide where we'll kind of pause, and I know staff has been collecting the comments that have been coming through, but if you have any comments or questions on goal one that I just presented, please enter them now, and we'll take a few minutes to try to read some of them off and then respond to them as needed. And I'll take a minute to catch my breath.
All right, Erica, we've got a question here regarding goal one. Regarding evolving conditions, we're supposed to get down to net zero CO2 emissions in 9 years. In what ways does this plan attempt to address that shift?
Caleb, who did you want to throw that question to? Or is that, you're throwing it to me?
Yeah, I think I'm throwing it to you. I think maybe Vision 2050 recommendations are where we possibly start there, but.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in for just a minute, Eric and Caleb. This is Ben McKay. I'm the SewerPAC Deputy Director. And I think we're looking at maybe some specific areas of the SEDS here, but I think Caleb has a good point that other regional plans such as Vision 2050, which is the long-range land use and transportation plan for the 7-county region, for anybody on the call that's not familiar with it, maybe would address some of these issues. Just as a very high overview summary, Vision 2050 does recommend a more compact development pattern than we've seen occur in the region over the last 30 to 35 years, as well as different transportation initiatives that may help to improve that situation.
I suppose I could just add a bit to that. I think there are steps being taken. It certainly is the early phase for us. The change in administration with more, zero carbon impact goals in it will be helpful in that respect. But I think it's still undetermined how that will happen. It is noteworthy, I think, that like We Energies, the utility companies and things, are moving maybe more quickly into providing alternative sources of energy, through wind power largely here. So that's a positive step in the right direction. The car companies are moving to electric cars. That's another positive step. We have to figure out what to do with the plants, as much of these emissions are coming from buildings. And I think companies are tending in that direction as well. Whether it gets there that fast, I don't think we've solved that issue yet, but that's where we stand. We're at least moving in that direction.
And I think maybe one other item, this has been again to point out, and maybe Eric, you can provide a little more detail on this. I mean, I think some of the information or actually strategies and actions included in our infrastructure section are going to kind of dovetail with some of those recommendations from Vision 2050, again, that would include transportation initiatives that may, again, help with the climate question, as well as, again, the compact development pattern set forth in Vision 2050, probably again dovetails with some of the, I think, livability actions and strategies that may be included in the SEDS. I don't know if you want to correct me if I'm wrong anywhere, Eric, or add any details to that.
No, I think you're right on, Ben, that Vision 2050, while we don't get into the detailed recommendations from Vision 2050, our regional long-range plan, I think goals 4 and 5 are really where we tried to tie in some of the key recommendations from Vision 2050 in terms of land use and transportation.
We have another question here. It's a discussion of a formation of a RDA, I'm assuming they mean Regional Development Authority, part of Strategy 1.2. So, Eric, do you want to take that? Do you want to?
I'm guessing, yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe the commenter can provide some additional detail, but I'm guessing that means like a Regional Transportation Authority, RTA, maybe that's a typo. If that's the case, the SEDS doesn't specifically recommend a Regional Transit Authority or Regional Transportation Authority per se. I think that's just not something that the SEDS touches on, but that's, I guess, a good comment or question that we can consider whether or not to elaborate on that or address that as part of the SEDS.
All right, we've got another question here that I'll pause it to Ben. How similar or different are these goals from the last SEDS that was submitted?
Yeah, so the last SEDS, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats activity that was done for the last SEDS, that was considered in this SEDS as well, and helped to inform some of the goals, strategies, and actions in this SEDS. So I think there is overlap, and I think there's some additional emphasis on the issues of equity and economic resilience in this SEDS as well, maybe in comparison to the last SEDS, which had a design year of 2015 to 2020. And again, as Eric touched on before, economic resilience is a major focus of the EDA right now. So we're following that guidance as we developed these goals, strategies, and action. And as well as Eric has discussed, the disparities in our region are very significant, especially when comparing against our other peer metro areas across the country. So that, of course, is a great importance to improving the economy for the region.
And I would add to that I think the focus on equity and inclusion is broader and deeper in this SEDS than the last one, although it was referenced in the last one. I think also too, further progress on the talent development and entrepreneurial front is evidenced in this SEDS. We've got more structure behind all those groups. We've developed a talent development process that includes, the 4 different talent pools, attracting talent, the traditional educational pipeline, upskilling in companies, and the untapped potential. So I think we've just got a stronger, deeper focus and more folks working on those things and moving the ball in the right direction.
All right, we've got a couple questions that kind of coincide with one another. And Pat, if you could answer these, what is our region's competitive advantage? What does it add to the US and global economy? And how will we differentiate ourselves from other Midwest regions?
Yeah, so I think competitive advantage, I think as most people know, is largely in our manufacturing strength. It's by far our largest industry. And even though there are fewer people employed, our IT component of our workforce is much higher than the national average, largely due in part to a very strong manufacturing industry that's focused on technology, along with our investment banking and finance industries, led by the insurance companies, NM and West Bend Mutual, and some of our investment banks. So those are our major competitive advantages. I think our workforce, our school systems across the region are largely better than most school systems around the country. And I'd say that from K through 12 and through higher ed. Our technical colleges, I actually go out and help train and teach other technical colleges. They're that strong, and I think they serve our region really well. We've got small schools that provide different types of education. So we have weaknesses, but I'd say those are our major strengths. Our quality of life, if you like 4 seasons, this is the place to be. And the abundance of parks, natural resources, water, all those things. You can go to a lot of places and can't find a park in a city. So as neglected as some of them have been, all of it's improving, and it's a good place to live, work, and play. Cost of living, we fall in that range of we're lower cost of living than the big cities. We're higher cost than some of our peers in the lower, especially in the lower Midwest, largely due to our housing costs are a bit higher. I don't know exactly why that is, but we do have a good housing stock. So I think we're competitive with the Midwest. We seem to bring in a lot of projects compared to our size peers in the Midwest, and can compete somewhat with the larger cities. So I think I caught everything.
Eric, I don't know if we've got time for 1 or 2 more before you want to move on, or
maybe let's do one more on this. I'm glancing through some of the comments and questions that are coming through as well, and I think some of them will actually be answered by some of the following slides on other goals, but other ones we can definitely try to type up responses for.
okay.
You have another one that we want to raise?
Yeah. This question is for Ben. Is regional unity a key factor in how EDA makes funding decisions? Do regions with greater degree of coordinated plans stand a better chance?
Well, I think to the second part of that question, regions with coordinated plans, that is actually the reason that we need to do the SEDS. The EDA wants regions to undertake this comprehensive economic development strategy process, really to improve coordination and have a coordinated plan about how economic development should move forward in a region. So SEDS is basically a requirement to, as Eric explained earlier, be eligible to apply for a number of grants that counties and local governments and some organizations can apply for in areas such as economic development planning and infrastructure, which we have done some county and local governments have done so successfully over the past 5 years after the development of the first SEDS, which took place in 2015. And I think the SEDS is important enough that there are other documents out there that can be considered, I think, what EDA calls equivalent documents. Oftentimes those are maybe a community's comprehensive plan or some other type of economic development document. However, I think the SEDS definitely puts an application in a more clear position to be successful.
All right, thank you, Ben. I think we'll move on to goal 2. And again, after this goal 2 slide, there's actually 2 slides here, I will I'll pause and we can read off some more questions or comments related to this goal. So goal 2, one of the 3 pillars, the theme of this goal is growth. And the goal is simply to grow, expand, and attract businesses. I would say that this goal of the 5 is probably the one that's most rich with actionable items. So there are quite a few actions under the 7 strategies in goal 2 that could be discussed and might get at actually some of the comments that are coming through. But at goal 2's heart is the need to pursue projects that add high value jobs by creating and expanding existing businesses as well as attracting new businesses to the region. And this is growth that should focus on the specific industry clusters that have been identified and are ones that offer competitive advantages in the global economy. So as the global economy continues to shift toward more knowledge-intensive products, services, and processes, regional economic growth will be increasingly dependent on innovation and adapting to a rapid technological transformation. So it's going to be imperative for the region to position itself over the next 5 years to seize on emerging growth opportunities. Strategy 2.1 says to create a comprehensive growth strategy. So this involves applying a wide variety of tools and methods to more deeply understand how economic productivity impacts growth, and then taking that information and translating it into specific strategies and investments. Part of that will also involve developing a data-driven economic model to project the effects of various growth variables and then potential strategies and investments as well. And then another key action under this strategy is to identify key emerging technologies and position the region to respond to major technological changes. Strategy 2.2 is to leverage assets to facilitate corporate retention, expansion, and attraction. The basic idea here is to produce new jobs while retaining existing jobs and attracting foreign direct investment from around the world. Key actions include providing tools to help employers impacted by the pandemic, increasing contract opportunities to minority and women-owned businesses, and increasing business opportunities to ethnically diverse businesses. Strategy 2.3 is to develop cross-cutting technology disciplines critical to our region's success. This strategy promotes the digital transformation and increasing the demand for tech jobs with a focus on tech-dependent industries like finance, IT, medical technology, pharmaceuticals, etc. Strategy 2.4 is to build on the region's strength as a leading manufacturing center and international supply chain anchor. So this strategy, one of the things that it does is aims to fortify and align critical manufacturing supply chains, including developing new capabilities that will reshore supplies and products that are critical to our domestic health and security. The strategy also talks about accelerating the adoption of new technologies, particularly among small and medium firms, those that may not have the resources that larger firms have. And then aligning training objectives with new tech developments and supporting regional diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts to provide more opportunities to communities of color. Those are the first 4 strategies under Goal 2, and there's 3 more. Strategy 2.5, this is about the industry clusters I mentioned. So strategy 2.5 says to advance specific industry clusters that offer competitive advantages. I know there was at least one comment that asked about competitive advantages. I think these clusters will be where you'll find information on what industries we think are are the ones that are most advantageous to the region. So we actually have a full appendix C of the SEDS report talks about these clusters in more detail. With the existing clusters that offer advantages, particular advantages are energy, power, and controls, water technology, food and beverage manufacturing, electronics manufacturing, and tourism and hospitality. And there are also some emerging clusters. The industries are always changing, and some of the emerging clusters that should be supported include finance and insurance services, headquarters and business services, medical technology, bioscience, health services, and pharmaceuticals, as well as aerospace and aeronautics. Strategy 2.6, there are quite a few actions under this strategy. But this strategy says to foster a dynamic, richly networked innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem. A lot of the actions here aim to identify gaps in this ecosystem and then really drive innovation and entrepreneurship. One is to enrich the array of resources available to emerging innovators and entrepreneurs that are in some of the highest potential clusters. Another is to sharply increase capital funds for entrepreneurs. We also want to expand access and opportunity for entrepreneurs of color and business ownership in low-income communities, and expand access to affordable capital for entrepreneurs of color and women to fill in gaps that we know exist in traditional capital markets. And the last strategy under Goal 2 is Strategy 2.7, which says to enhance the export capacity of firms, focusing on small and medium-sized enterprises. This strategy involves better aligning various resources around exporting and supporting those small and mid-sized firms that are trying to develop export strategies and plans, help them do that. And then also leveraging large companies as catalysts to mentor some of the smaller companies in the region. That summarizes Goal 2 and the strategies and actions under that goal. Like we did for Goal 1, I just wanted to pause here. And Caleb, do you have any comments or questions on Goal 2 yet? If not, we can pause for a minute or two to let people type some in.
Yeah, we have a comment on the largest business park in Milwaukee County has no transit, no buses, and no ride share. I think I can send that right over to you, Eric, but also I think we might cover that a little more later on with our infrastructure goal.
I would say that's probably more of an infrastructure related comment. What business park did you say?
It's this is Kevin Muse, Executive Director from the Regional Planning Commission staff. This is referring to the Franklin Business Park, I believe, down on off of Ryan Road. And yes, we'll talk a little bit more about that in future goals, as Eric and Caleb indicated. But just want to note that Commission staff is definitely well aware, and so is M7, about the challenges of public transit access in the region, and that it's a substantial obstacle for a lot of people. It's a huge obstacle from an access to opportunity perspective, access to work, access to education, and other things like that for people who don't have a car or can't afford a car, can't drive a car, etc. And it's also a big challenge for a lot of businesses in the region. If you're located in areas outside of transit service areas, we have heard from many businesses that a lack of labor is limiting their growth. And part of the lack of labor issue absolutely is that there's a substantial portion of the region, as we'll talk about under Goal 4 with our untapped potential strategy, that is not accessible to your business then because you are outside of those transit service areas. So, yep.
We've got another comment here about needing to include clean energy tech and fossil fuels in integration with each other. I think it's easy to recognize that the transition is going to be difficult and that fossil fuels are integral to the economy, but I think that the transition to clean energy is is going to be really important for building jobs and having a resilient economy and infrastructure. We have a couple comments on workforce, which is something that we will get into, I think, in the next goal.
Yes, goal 3 is the talent goal, which talks about workforce. I do think we'll answer maybe some of those questions in that goal. Any other comments or questions on, specifically on growing businesses and some of the approaches that are discussed under that goal? I think if we get any more comments on that, let's raise those, Caleb.
Yeah, so here's a comment. I guess I'll ask Pat, what steps are being taken to enrich the relationship with region area universities such as Marquette, UWM, and MSOE to provide guidance and innovation to minority businesses and small businesses?
So, and I think this too will be in the talent development goal, the next goal. But in short, the Higher Ed Regional Alliance has been formed, and we're fully connected in that. In fact, I'm on the board with that. So it is equity and connections permeate all of these goals, and the universities are well aware of the issues and want to connect, whether it's a university or technical college or a small school. So I think that'll be better addressed in the next goal. But and businesses want to connect too. So I think if we walk through the next goal, we'll get there.
Yeah, agreed, Pat. We'll touch on that alliance that you mentioned and as part of the educational pipeline talent pool.
All right, yeah, I think we can move on. I think a lot of other comments are referencing things that will be covered very soon.
Sounds good. Yeah, and keep the comments coming. Feel free to ask questions or post comments on any goals that we've already covered, and move on to goal 3 here. So goal 3, as I mentioned, is about talent. It's focused on talent, one of the 3 pillars, one of the focuses of the Prosperity 2025 campaign as well. So this goal is to ensure a qualified workforce that meets the future needs of employers. So just a kind of an introduction to this goal. This is perhaps the most critical factor for increasing the region's productivity and growth prospects. Perhaps the most critical factor is to upgrade and better align the skills of the workforce with the occupations that are and will be demanded by employers. So this goal is about increasing the on-ramps to labor force participation, while also creating paths to upward mobility, particularly for the region's central city residents and people of color. At the core of this goal are recent efforts by MMAC and M7 focusing on innovative collaborative approaches around 4 distinct talent pools, which are covered by the first 4 strategies under this goal that are on the slide right now. So strategy 3.1 is to match the skills of the current workforce with the needs of employers. So this is where we want to develop inclusive, collaborative, employer-led partnerships to improve talent development. We also want to create certification and credentialing programs that help workers with lower skill sets or medium skill sets to gain skills they need to move up the ladder. And then also we want to expand career pathway initiatives so that workers and those transitioning to new careers are matched with the right training and job opportunities. So that's strategy 3.1. 3.2 is to align the educational pipeline with the needs of employers. This includes identifying and projecting the skills of the future. It also includes supporting programs focused on college enrollment and completion, particularly those focused on underrepresented students of color, other historically underserved populations, and first-generation students. One big component of the educational pipeline talent pool that Pat just mentioned, he's a member of, on the board for, is the Higher Education Regional Alliance, which is a network of 18 higher education institutions formed to reduce skills and talent gaps in southeastern Wisconsin. And these institutions are pursuing strategies centered on 3 key outcomes. Number 1, raise the region's college completion rate. Number 2, increase program innovation, growth, and alignment with demand. And number 3, better connect employers with the talent coming out of these colleges. Strategy 3.3, foster greater employment of the untapped potential talent pool. So this involves developing the work skills of non-traditional talent pools. And these are the folks that often have substantial barriers to employment, such as non-high school graduates, those who have been through the criminal justice system, as well as single female heads of households. One of the key actions in this strategy is to support community-based initiatives like the United Way's Reducing Barriers to Employment Task Force and the Milwaukee Reentry Network. And these initiatives work to prepare and then place those that have been disenfranchised into sustainable jobs that have opportunities for upward mobility. Strategy 3.4 is to attract out-of-market talent. I believe I saw a comment about what the SEDS says about attracting those from the coasts or other parts of the country. This strategy would develop resources to help employers communicate the value proposition of living and working in southeastern Wisconsin. And it also involves working with groups of employers to come up with collaborative solutions that increase the pool of qualified candidates for jobs that are in high demand but are hard to fill. So 2 more strategies. So these 4 strategies, just to reiterate, these cover the four talent pools that MMAC and M7 have talked about. There's 2 additional strategies under goal 3. Strategy 3.5 is to position southeastern Wisconsin as a region of choice for diverse talent. This 5th strategy revolves around MMAC and M7's Region of Choice initiative, which is focused on addressing racial disparities by expanding opportunities and creating equity for Black and Brown talent, students, and businesses. The website for that, in case anyone is interested, is mmac.org/ROC, particularly if there are any businesses on the call that have not signed the pledge, which is the first action under this strategy, is to increase the number of employers pledging to participate in the Region of Choice initiative. So by pledging, employers are committing to increasing the total number of their employees that are African American or Hispanic by 15%, as well as committing to their African American or Hispanic managers increasing by 25%. I know last I checked, there were 110 employers representing over 140,000 employees that have signed the pledge. And just one note, as part of the initiative, it's not just a pledge, but there are also resources being developed and available for employers that will help them to achieve their goals and to allow them to share best practices among one another. The last strategy under goal 3 is 3.6, align workforce development with growth opportunities in targeted clusters, those clusters that we talked about before. So this is really about providing a regular platform for regional employers to provide input on job demand, both short and long term. Involves providing information, improving the information, including real-time data available to the education and training system regarding the demand and supply of particular skill sets that employers are looking for. And really the idea here is to continually strengthen that feedback loop between employers and the education and workforce development world. So that concludes goal 3 on talent. Are there any talent related or goal 3 related comments or questions that we've received so far, Caleb?
Yeah, I've got a couple to address to M7 and Pat, but we'll take them one at a time so it doesn't get too overbearing. The first question, what financial partnerships is this area providing to minority entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so there are several programs in the area, and I'm not familiar with all of them, but I think most programs, whether it's minority entrepreneurs, the CARES Act funding, both at the state level and the city level, So I'd have to defer to the city. I don't know the numbers, but they just had several $1 million that were provided to probably mostly sort of Main Street type entrepreneurs. You know, until COVID, most of a great amount of the funding, entrepreneurial funding, was not Main Street, but was more technology based or something like bigger, something that could be grown into a bigger enterprise. So I don't have I'm not the right person to ask on the detail on the entrepreneurship. We can get you the information, and it may come up in our growth strategy. I think under entrepreneurship may have listed several places, but funding is definitely focused. There's more money for entrepreneurship. The state's looking at $100 million investment in a major fund, and then they've also been very active with federal CARES Act funding and their own funding in terms of helping to maintain, sustain, and grow minority businesses and really Main Street businesses.
All right, thank you for that one, Pat. And the next one, how are we thinking of attracting an increasingly remote and mobile professional workforce independent of a Southeast Wisconsin employer? It has the opportunity to create immediate economic impact and future talent pool.
Great question. We're actually looking at this right now, trying to use AI and some mapping to uncover what people either went to school here, grew up here, lived here, what people have an affinity for the region, and how can we find them? And the AI is you know, through modeling on information we get from schools to you know, LinkedIn, Facebook, those kind of things, to trying to find and locate those people, and then offering marketing directly to them to see if they have an interest in coming back. In the first stage of this, I think the statistics are something like remote working went from 5 million people to 45 million people in the pandemic. We expect many of those to go back to work at places, but we expect many to stay. So whatever that number is, we'd like to capture the ones that would prefer Wisconsin because they know it. Quality of life, being with your family or close to it, all those things matter. And if they can do that, it's one way to attract and grow our workforce. And then as they change jobs and things, I think it also enhances the employment pool for our current employers. So it really has a two-edged sword. It helps. We're going to work on trying to pull them back in, and then I think it provides a bigger labor pool for other employers to expand as people change jobs and see different opportunities.
Thank you for that one, Pat. And one more I'll send your way since you're so good at this. How do we create links to all of Wisconsin University's research to fuel entrepreneurship?
Good question. It's been a challenge. I think there are links, there are opportunities. I'd say we've gone beyond the last SEDS. It was in its fledgling stages, but UWM is getting off the ground with their entrepreneurship program. Madison, of course, is one of the leading research institutions in the world. UWM has a pretty good amount of research given the size and status of their college. Marquette and some of the others have some research capabilities as well. But I think we need to improve the linkages. I can't tell you. HERA is one aspect of that, is to pull the universities together. We can obviously do more together than we can do singly. So that's one avenue.
Great. Thank you, Pat.
All right.
Eric, this
Were
is
there any
Kevin.
others
I
that
just
you
wanted
want
to.
Oh, sorry, Kevin.
Sorry, I just wanted to note. I'm not sure we're seeing others that we need to. I want to let you move on to number 4 here, but I did want to note that we are seeing a number of individuals note that workforce shortage is that they do hear from businesses that workforce shortage, or they may represent a business where workforce shortage is a limiting factor to growth. So yeah, absolutely, the strategy recognizes that that's a substantial challenge for our region. And we definitely welcome any input that anyone has, and please type it in or send us an email or something like that on how we can sharpen that to improve that part of the strategy if need be.
Thanks, Kevin. Yep, I will. So I'll move on to goal 4. Like I said, after goal 2, if you have any comments on any of the first 3 goals, please feel free to type them in the chat or in the questions pane. But goal 4 is about livability. This goal says to enhance the region's quality of life and attractiveness to businesses, residents, workers, and visitors. And this is the 3rd pillar, if you will, of the goals. So we know that southeastern Wisconsin boasts numerous strengths, from cultural and recreational opportunities to strong educational and healthcare systems, from urban amenities to an attractive balance of rural and natural areas. But also along with these strengths are some pretty major challenges that the region needs to confront to retain and enhance its attractiveness. A shift in regional development and redevelopment patterns has begun to take place and is kind of ongoing through major targeted efforts across the region. Just to highlight a few: the 30th Street Industrial Corridor in Milwaukee, also the Menominee Valley Harbor District, I-94 North-South Corridor, Pleasant Prairie, Pabst Farms, and there are downtown improvement projects throughout the region that are ongoing. I think we would note that growth can be further accelerated by catalyzing additional development that follows the principles of density, mixed uses, and strong physical and virtual connections between residential and commercial activity. I think as Ben mentioned earlier, a lot of the livability type actions or recommendations come from Vision 2050, our long-range land use and transportation plan. So you may see some overlap if you're familiar with that plan. Strategy 4.1 is to support sustainable development that balances growth and quality of life. Again, this is about promoting development of well-connected, dense, mixed-use communities and neighborhoods, and enhancing the ability of the region's residents to age in place. Also involves promoting development of brownfields and underutilized properties. Strategy 4.2 is to make the region attractive to residents, businesses, workers, and visitors. Some actions under this strategy are to establish and coordinate internal and external branding, marketing, and advertising efforts for the region, targeted at both national and local audiences. Make sure everybody knows how great we are. Support the efforts of Visit Milwaukee and other regional tourism marketing organizations to promote and enhance the region's tourist attractions, and to foster a culture that is welcoming to diverse talent from outside the region. Strategy 4.3 is to support policies that seek to remedy racial and economic segregation and address longstanding disparities. Under this strategy, we note that there's a need to pursue catalytic real estate opportunities in areas of need, particularly in those designated economically distressed areas and opportunity zones I mentioned before. Also, a strong need to remove barriers preventing people of color in high poverty central city neighborhoods to move into predominantly white communities and access amenities in those communities. And then other examples of ways to achieve this strategy include increasing public school funding, expanding early childhood initiatives, increasing affordable childcare options, helping previously incarcerated individuals re-enter the workforce, and ensuring access to fresh foods. For the last one, I would just make a quick plug and note that the Commission is in the early stages of preparing a regional food system plan. I believe we're bringing together a wide-ranging committee of individuals to provide input on that plan, and the process is ongoing. That is all I have to say on goal 4, livability. I know we're getting a little close to being short on time, so I'll pop up this slide, and if there are some comments on goal 4, be happy to take them now, maybe give a minute or two, and then we can move on to goal 5.
So we haven't received any specific livability comments. I think that those are kind of integrated in some of the previous comments that we've gotten as well.
Okay. tell you what, for the sake of time, I think I will move on to goal 5. But if there are any comments on goal 4 or questions on goal 4, maybe feel free to interrupt me, Caleb, and we can cover those. Otherwise, we can respond by typing. All right, goal 5. This is the infrastructure goal. I know we've had a few interested in some of what the SEDS says about infrastructure. If you do recall from the initial graphic of the 5 goals, this is the sort of the supporting piece at the base of the graphic. The idea here is to provide a modern, efficient regional infrastructure that really supports the rest of the goals. So we know that high quality infrastructure contributes to the region's economic growth and enhances productivity. This means we need to make strategic investments to improve the existing transportation network, better connecting workers to employers, employers to customers, and suppliers to customers, and headquarters to their facilities in other regions and countries. We also need reliable and cost-effective utilities like electricity, natural gas, water, sewer, and it's becoming as important as ever to provide modern and affordable communications infrastructure that ensures residents and businesses are digitally connected. Strategy 5.1 is to improve and maintain a financially sustainable transportation system. As I mentioned before, there are some significant funding issues for the transportation system, especially the street and highway network and our transit systems. We do have a number of notable assets. Our street and highway system is pretty high performing, like I mentioned before, compared to peers. We have very efficient transit systems, extensive bike network. Mitchell International, Port Milwaukee, Regions Railways are all very important. We also have an advantage being in proximity to Chicago's O'Hare Airport. But as we've documented numerous times, the Commission has, most notably in Vision 2050, that the transportation system faces significant challenges. Just to talk about that funding piece, an overall transportation funding shortfall is making it increasingly difficult to maintain and rebuild our highway network in a timely manner. Transit systems across the region face an equally daunting funding shortfall. Lastly, just given an expected increase, and this is where resilience comes in, giving an expected increase in the frequency of large storm events, we need to ensure that our transportation infrastructure is resilient to flooding, other natural disasters. So strategy 5.2, ensure the efficient, cost-effective provision of public infrastructure and services. Just a couple of actions sort of under this strategy are to encourage government agencies to share infrastructure-related services and combine infrastructure improvements into single projects. And that way they can increase efficiency and decrease overall costs. The strategy is also about promoting green infrastructure practices, encouraging sustainable use of water resources, improving water supply and wastewater treatment systems, and enhancing the resilience of utility infrastructure, particularly to the flooding and other natural disasters. Strategy 5.3, connect underserved populations to economic and employment opportunities. Again, I think there was a comment along these lines that I saw in the chat. But to improve the accessibility of jobs to all residents, something the SEDS focuses on, as well as Vision 2050, as we mentioned earlier. It's important that the region provide a more diverse and affordable housing stock near concentrations of jobs, both for renters and owners. On the flip side, but more on the transportation side of things, a significantly improved transit system should be developed that provides better access to jobs and other opportunities. To achieve this, again, the funding piece here, to achieve this and prevent a disparate impact on people of color, people experiencing poverty, as well as people with disabilities, it will require encouraging the state to address the significant and ongoing transit funding gap. A lot of the funding requirements or restrictions are really at the state level. The final strategy under Goal 5, the final strategy overall is Strategy 5.4, which is to expand broadband speed, availability, and access. Addressing the broadband affordability issue is critical to expanding accessibility and reducing the digital divide between those who have high-speed internet access and those who do not. On the flip side, it's important to pursue grants to expand broadband coverage to the rural communities, some of those communities that don't have good coverage or higher speeds presently. And specific infrastructure improvements include developing our wired fiber optic network, provide reliable high-speed internet signals, expanding the 5G network coverage beyond the major urban areas, and as well improving wireless network infrastructure to accommodate the growing need for everyday digital access. So that concludes the fifth and final goal here. If there are any questions or comments, I'm not seeing a lot coming through, but Caleb, if you've noticed anything and you want to bring it up, let me know.
Yep, so we've got a question here for Kevin. It's addressing the what will be done to ensure that the plan doesn't perpetuate what we have now. We've run into issues with funding. So how is this plan going to be different moving forward and exploring out of the box or innovative ideas for transportation?
Yeah, thanks, Caleb. Yeah, that's a really great question. So, and this is something that we've tried to delve in with our separate Vision 2050 plan, which we, of course, is related to the SEDS, but is not the same document. So I apologize that we keep referring to that. But there are different transit solutions or non-driving solutions, I guess, depending on where you are in the region. And what's appropriate really depends on the density and what else is going on in the surrounding area. And as the questioner noted, that buses can be really expensive depending on where they're operating. So they can be very efficient in the densest parts of the region and fairly expensive per passenger to operate in areas that are slightly less dense, or even areas that are dense but aren't right next to other very dense areas. And so something that is going on right now, and we'll make sure to include this in the SEDS as appropriate, is that there is movement working towards trying to establish a way to fund and operate flexible shuttles and things like that in the region. This is something we've struggled with for several years now in our region, and I'm not going to promise that we have a solution, but there is progress being made. There's a project with UWM where they're researching, looking at connecting workers from the north side of Milwaukee to jobs in Menominee Falls. There's an organization called the Regional Transit Leadership Council that is working on obtaining some grants to study other parts of the Milwaukee metro area. And then there's also opportunities that, for instance, the governor's proposed budget includes a $4 million increase for what's called employment transportation assistance programs. And though that type of funding could absolutely fund these sorts of flexible services that are focused on connecting that untapped potential workforce that we talked about in goal 3 to where the jobs are located across the region. So we are working on it. The planning efforts can't necessarily force something to happen, but it's definitely something we're aware of and are trying to identify a solution to the problem that can be sustained and is funded. So.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm just going to jump in real quick. I know there's one question about how to submit a more lengthy response after the webinar. In a few slides, I'll put up contact information, but just in case anyone has to leave, if you go to the SEDS website, sewrpc.org/CEDS, there's contact info there. You can email us, you can give us a phone call, you can mail a letter, or I believe there's a comment box directly on that website that you can type in your comments. Hopefully that helps address that question. I think we've only got about 10 minutes in our allotted time left. I know there's a couple more comments on here or questions, but I think unless you wanted to bring anything up, Caleb or Kevin, I'm just going to move on to the next slide and we can try to address those in the chat. All right.
Yep, that works.
Okay, thanks. So just talking about implementation, which is an important component of the action plan. One thing that we do identify is some performance measures to evaluate the progress of the proposed strategies and actions in achieving the economic development goals. One thing I would note here is that M7 does produce an ongoing performance scorecard that tracks performance measures, as shown in the graphic here, on total project wins, direct jobs, average wage, direct payroll, and new capital investment. So that's something that they produce and put out there. There's a number of additional indicators that we will look at going forward to measure the success of the SEDS. And I think if you're interested in our thoughts on that, those are present in the draft report. EDA grant programs, I won't go into detail on those programs other than to say they're intended to support local and regional economic development efforts by providing economically distressed communities and regions with resources to address economic needs. Those programs, again, are discussed in the full SEDS. EDA investment guidelines reflect the national priorities that are being pursued and are used to evaluate applications for EDA funding. So these 5 priorities include recovery and resilience, critical infrastructure, workforce development and manufacturing, exports and foreign direct investment, and opportunity zones. Each of those is described a little bit in the SEDS as well in more detail. And then lastly, but not least, certainly not least, the SEDS report documents the numerous economic development projects underway or planned that illustrate some of the ways the action plan is being implemented. There are project tables for each county and some region-wide projects that are included in the SEDS. And within those, there's a column that identifies the specific strategy numbers that I've reviewed already to help the reader connect the projects back to the strategies they help to achieve. These aren't necessarily all of the economic development projects in the region, but there are quite a few of them, and they illustrate some of those, again, some of those ways that that economic development is being pursued throughout the region.
Can I jump in and add something real quick, Eric?
Yep.
This is Ben again. I just wanted to maybe build on something that Eric was talking about with the economic development projects. Again, those projects are listed to kind of provide a potential direct link for EDA applications for grants. The SEDS is also designed through the strategy, the goals, strategies, and actions to really be able to provide some ties for county and local governments and maybe other organizations to apply for EDA grants for a project that might not specifically be listed in this list of projects. You know, as we know, the SEDS looks out over a 5-year timeline, and certainly opportunities may arise during that 5-year timeline that were not anticipated. So that's one of the kind of the key parts of the design of the SEDS, I think, is to make sure that the goals, strategies, and actions really allow for kind of a broad umbrella for county and local governments to apply for those important EDA grant programs.
Yes, thank you, Ben. That's a good point I forgot to mention. Okay, as promised, here's our how to provide feedback slide. So again, you can go to the website, sewerpac.org/CEDS. The email, in case you want to send us a direct email, is ceds@sewrpc.org. There's also a phone number. We do have a fax machine, and you can send us a traditional letter in the mail with any comments. As I mentioned, all the feedback that we receive will be considered as the draft SEDS, actually as the final SEDS is prepared. There's a typo on the slide. Just to go over a few of the next steps so everyone knows what to expect. Again, we're open through March 31st, the end of the month, for any comments. So if anyone was unable to attend today, or if you want more time to think through some comments, please contact us by the end of the month so we can incorporate those and consider them. The final draft, once we incorporate feedback, we'll be working with each of our 7 counties to request adoption by their county boards. And once that process is complete, we will submit the final draft to EDA after the commission adopts it. So that concludes the slides that I've got. Any closing remarks or anything that came up in the chat that we want to address, Caleb?
We've had a couple questions asking if the presentation, I think not just the slides, but the recording of the presentation will be made available.
Yes, I believe we will be sending out the recording and as well posting the presentation. So we should be able to provide both of those.
Okay. We have one last question that is, I guess, addressing goal 5 and the economic development projects. It said that geographically, a lot of the business park projects are located within the I-94-43 corridor. And if there's an opportunity to coordinate the projects with some sort of transportation or transit solution to create linkages and increase accessibility to jobs.
Did you have that one teed up for somebody?
So I don't know if you wanted to take that, if M7 has had contact with these different municipalities about these projects. And
I see Kevin.
Caleb, I think I can tackle that one. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of course, a lot of economic activity happening in close range of the freeway system in Metro Milwaukee, and the various job developments that are located not too far from either 94 or 43 absolutely, represent corridors where that sort of dynamic transportation solution that I talked about to provide people access is really being focused. So I think that's something that we'll continue to explore as we try to identify again a sustainable or any really funding source to get that started, and then hopefully a sustainable funding source for the long term for that sort of solution.
All right, thank you, Kevin. I think that we'll wrap things up. I want to say thank you to everybody who took the time and stuck with us for the full hour and a half. Again, the recording and the slides will be prepared or will be provided after the meeting. Again, if you have any comments, we definitely welcome and encourage them to the end of the process. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Good job.
Thank you, Pat.